Dear friends and colleagues from across Europe, a warm welcome to all of you from a cloudy Brussels day to this new edition of European Chats. As most of you know, for the past 2 years, we have been holding these online discussions between members of the European Movement International Network from across Europe and across society. The idea is to discuss informally the challenges that civil society is facing in the context of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, but also the wider debates on the future of Europe. Of course, look into how all these are affecting our work, but also our societies at large, and then build on the cooperation that the European Movement International is promoting for its member organizations. For today's discussion, we have with us two dear colleagues, two valuable colleagues from the European Movement in Netherlands and the European Movement in Lithuania. Starting from Lithuania, Gaja is the president of EM Lithuania. Thank you very much for joining us, Gaja, this morning.
Hello, everyone. Nice meeting you.
And with her will be Mark, who is the president of the European Movement Netherlands. Mark, very welcome to you too.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Well, as I was saying in the introduction, these conversations are supposed to bring together members of our network to discuss the challenges that we're all facing. And the one big challenge at the moment that the whole of the continent is dealing is the war, or the return of war on our doorstep after the unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine from Russia and everything that has followed since then. We are now in November. The war has been going on since February. We have gone through a lot of very difficult months, but also we have seen a very spirited resistance from the Ukrainians in defense of democracy, in defense of their freedom, and very strong solidarity from the side of the European Union. Impressive collective decisions that a few months ago would have been unthinkable and are really spearheading the EU's response. Maybe, Gaja, I'll start with you first, not least because Lithuania has been on the forefront of calling for a strong response from the European Union. So do you mind taking us through a little bit? What is the sentiment now in the country vis-a-vis the war and with regards to the EU's response to Russia's invasion? And how are you, the European movement in Lithuania, but also civil society at large, are coping with this?
Thank you, Petros, for raising this very important question and starting with it. I think it's not just very important to talk about it, but to have real measures and keep to them. And talking about Lithuania is a very small EU country. And talking about war in Ukraine, it's important to be EU as an orchestra. I mean that all the decision has to be united, and that has to come from as united European Union and support Ukrainian, and especially all the measures they need right now, and working with the civil society. So what we meet right now, a lot of people are fleeing, and in Lithuania even we have around 60,000 Ukrainians living right now and staying mothers with children without husbands because they are stayed in Ukraine. And it's very important not just to integrate them, but prepare them a place where afterward they can come back. And this will have a long-term consequences. That's why we need to agree what do we do next. We need to put our steps and how we cope with the situation, because Ukraine is fighting a war which is not theirs war. It's the war of all Europe, and it depends how it ends to the whole of us. I think we lived in a very safe world. Young generation, we don't remember, we don't know what is war. We have not experienced it, and this war takes a lot of energy and takes a lot of things we need to do and prepare to be doing in the future. So I think the situation is clear. Now we have to agree what do we do next.
Indeed. And that's, I think, something that is felt around Europe, that it hasn't just been the European Union institutions or member state governments that responded, but citizens and civil society have played a crucial role on the front line, especially for those countries that have been the recipients overwhelmingly of Ukrainian refugees. And I think that's really crucial to highlight that civil society really stepped up, and individual citizens have opened their homes, opened their wallets, really contributed to defending and supporting those people fleeing conflict. Mark, I mean, the same thing applies to all EU member states, not least the Netherlands. One of the founding members of the EU, always at the forefront of the debates on European integration. And I wonder to what degree the war in Ukraine has affected the conversation within Netherlands about the direction the EU should take. There's been a relatively new government there for a while. We've seen a different kind of rhetoric on a variety of issues, including energy, but also defense cooperation. Has the war in Ukraine changed the narrative within the government and wider society in the Netherlands?
Yeah, let me first say that the invasion of by Russia of Ukraine was a very big shock in the Netherlands, in Holland. It may be comparable with the invasion of the Soviet Union in Hungary in 56. So it opened the eyes of the Dutch people that Europe is vulnerable, and that made a change in thinking in the Netherlands, that that war in Europe is possible, and that opened up a discussion and a lot of support for Ukraine. I think we have about 80,000 refugees from Ukraine, and they were very much welcomed here and helped. So that's and it is also a change in how Dutch politics look at Europe. I think there is no, apart from a small right-wing party, any party who has any questions about the need of a united Europe. So that's very strong. Well, I think that's the situation. What you see now is also that you see there's a discussion in the media how we keep this spirit alive. Also, meaning that we have to not to forget Ukraine. That still will be on the front page of the newspapers and the media. So we have to keep that alive.
Very true indeed, and that's something, in fact, that we have identified as a challenge also from the beginning. That worry that the more the indirect effects of the war are felt across Europe, and the more people are even getting used to the idea of war, the harder it is to maintain political support for this. Gaja, have you noticed any sense of fatigue in Lithuania? Or is both political elites, but also people, still committed to rebuffing Russia's aggression and defending Ukraine?
Well, thank you for mentioning the civil society role after my introduction speech, and I think that's very important. What we saw, that the cooperation between the government and the civil society organization has strengthened a lot after the refugees in Ukraine. And of course, we see some downs and ups again, but we have a lot of civil society organization influencers who are working on this topic and bringing it up all the time. And I think that could be as well the role for European Movement International to raise this question, have it on the top agendas all the time. And talking about this, that we cannot relax. It's not a relaxing time, even though I have colleagues coming from Ukraine, and they are scared when the plane goes up in the sky, because they are from their experiences, what they experience in Ukraine. And I think that's terrible. That's a terrific situation, and we cannot go on like that. And all the support has to go on. The winter is coming, and hopefully it won't be very cold, but still people need simple things for surviving. And I think the role on our level has to raise this question, talk and support the Ukrainians, the ones who has fleeing to our countries, but as well the ones who have stayed in Ukraine.
Indeed, and I mean, the European network has been quite vocal across the board. Both our national offices around Europe, but also the stakeholders that are part of the organization, be it social partners, NGOs, political parties even. You see that across the board there is strong support in favor of Ukraine's independence and freedom, and pushing forward for more integration from Europe. Mark, I mean, there is this is also a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the Conference on the Future of Europe, because in the midst of this, following the pandemic and while there is a war going on, the EU has engaged itself in a very open participatory process for over a year, engaging citizen stakeholders, politicians, national and local governments in a debate around the future of Europe. And one thing that came quite strong, especially from the citizen recommendations, is that the added value that the EU can offer is that idea that we can pull together and defend each other. So we have seen some interesting proposals coming from the Conference on the Future of Europe about the future of European defense and security. Not so much the creation of an EU army, but a much closer integration and mutual defense of member states. Again, Netherlands is a founding member state. Do you think there is a chance that the EU can become more active and more integrated in the area of defense and security as well?
Yes, I think that will be the case because it's a necessity, and the Netherlands were not very much in favor of a military integration of Europe, but you see now they're saying, I want to say there will not in the immediate future a European army, but there will be much more coordination in also, for instance, how we bring military hardware from the Netherlands to Eastern Europe or to the Baltic countries. That's in those measures they will be taken, and Holland is very much working on that. Also on other ways of cooperating and also in cybersecurity. It's not only military hardware we think about, but it's also working on and thinking about other means of a broad security agenda for Europe.
Yeah, and I mean, Gaja, in the context of the conference, was it something that had a cut through in the Lithuanian discussion? Was there visibility around the conference? I mean, I had the pleasure to be in the plenary, and I do remember that your Europe minister took part actively in the plenary sessions. He's now the ambassador to the EU, but he was there. He was very active and quite vocal. Was there a discussion in Lithuania, both in the capital and across the country, around the conference?
Well, I have to think, and yes and no. We had some discussion on the national level, but I think the regional level was not so active and not involved so much. So I think that the conference on the future of Europe has faced some challenges, but I think it's not of the idea. It's because of the timing, and you could not have live meetings. You could just do it online. So that probably was the main challenges which it faced. But talking about the Conference of Europe, we already raised very good questions and very good proposals from our societies, from the civil society, which are active ones, and they want to reshape the future of Europe, how they see and what is important issues. And I think what we're talking about, it has, first of all, it has to have clear follow-up, especially for the citizens and civil society organizations which have made their proposals. How it is going to be implemented, what is going to be implemented, and are we talking about a European civil society strategy, or are we talking about other things? And I think such process as it has been with the Conference on the Future of Europe has to be a long term. So we cannot make just one step and stop. I think we have to make it a long-term, ongoing process. And when there are important issues ongoing in the EU, when we talk about strategies, when we talk about other strategic documents, the civil society has to be involved, and we have to put the clear ways how it can be involved in the processes.
No, that's very true indeed. And of course, I wouldn't do anything else but echo that sentiment, because the conference demonstrated again the constructive role that civil society can play, both in terms of the expertise that we bring, but also the communications channels that we have with a variety of constituencies that might not be involved in politics as such, but they're very much involved in a variety of issues at the local, regional, national, and European level. Mark, there is indeed now a wave, a proposal to incorporate deliberative and participatory democracy together with representative democracy. And the Commission has said that they will institutionalize citizens' panels with much more specific focus, starting from food waste, for example. And like Gaja said, their ambition is to incorporate these citizens' panels into the normal decision-making process and have them contribute the perspective of citizens alongside the proposals of the Commission and the scrutiny coming from the European Parliament and, of course, the heads of state and government of the Council. How do you view that idea of participatory democracy complementing and supporting representative democracy? And do you think in the Netherlands there is a tradition for this kind of decision-making from citizens?
Yeah, I think it's a very good initiative to do this. And we are, as a European movement Netherlands, we are started a program. It's called Possible Futures of Europe, to think with all kind of representatives of the Netherlands, government, NGOs, Dutch Association of Municipalities, individual citizens, scientists, to discuss how we can make this participant democracy better. And you see that at municipality level, for instance, a lot of municipalities are working on this to get people more involved in decision making on every level. How to spend, how to improve the physical infrastructure of a city, how to improve the social domain, the infrastructure of a city. So those initiatives are going, and we are supporting this and bringing people together to get more ideas about this.
Mm-hmm. That's indeed great, because again, there is a lot of debate around the nature of our democracy, even the health of our democracy, and some of the polling we have been doing over the last few years demonstrates that people are switching off. They are not supporting democracy as much as they used to. And I think the reason behind it, again, that comes through our polling and our research, is that they don't feel engaged, they don't feel empowered, they feel alienated. So, incorporating this deliberative participatory element into our representative democracy can certainly help alleviate that sense of disempowerment and alienation. With a small caveat that we can add a third dimension to that triangle. Organized civil society has a very strong role to play still. And its role should also be institutionalized into that decision making.
I think it's the key is that the government, and that was the first outcome of a meeting we had on this subject, is that the government should listen. That's the key word. And if there are all kind of fora where people can say what they think, that's a big step. That's a big step. And if you make that very accessible for citizens, especially on a local level, that will improve how people think about democracy. That's how they think is democracy, is feeling heard by the government or the institution. And that's a very important first step, not top down, but bottom up way of democracy. Yeah.
Well, just to follow up what Mark just told, I totally agree what you said, and I would go even one step up forward, talking it's just not important to listen, but to agree on the common actions. And then when people, organized civil society, participate in the implementation and follow up or monitoring, then they take the responsibility. And then we are talking about the two main issues. We're talking about the transparency of the government on the national, regional, and we are talking about the openness. And I think that's very important. We really in Lithuania, civil society organizations, the active ones are involved on the national and regional level, but sometimes talking is not enough because it's easy to talk. We have elections this year. In 2 years, we have elections on the national level and European level. So now they start listening, but then afterwards, everything stops. So I think it's very important to maintain the same level, not just talking, but agreeing on the common actions and implementing it.
Very true.
Yeah, I agree. I think the big issue, if you talk about the Netherlands, is that at the national level, the government people think the government is not listening. They are, and I think that's true. They are very much busy with each other, the parliament internally, and the parliament and the government, and people are looking at it, but they are not feeling involved, and that's an issue which is not which is not good at this peculiar moment, because there are so much societal issues which we have to tackle. And all those issues are combined, so that gives a feeling of a crisis in the Netherlands.
And speaking of crisis, we are still dealing with a pandemic, a global pandemic that had profound effects, both in terms of people's well-being and health, but also the social fabric of our society was stretched, both due to the lockdowns, but also because of the very intense debates that took place in our countries about the response and how best to deal with the pandemic. And to some degree, we saw discussions around science as well, and people questioning scientific evidence and challenging those scientific proposals. Is that debate still taking place in your countries? Do you still see arguments and disagreements around how to deal with the pandemic, or has this intense discussion dissipated now that the pandemic seems to be under control? Mark, if you want to go first.
Yeah, the discussion about the pandemic is not that big at the moment, but it has continued in other societal discussions, where people use the same kind of arguments. There's a lot about fake news, and that was during the pandemic, and that continues now in other areas. So that's the unease below the pandemic discussion is still there, the societal unease, and is continuing in the other debates, and that's unease with the government, and that hasn't changed. Because there's something underneath this pandemic discussion. But I don't see a big discussion about vaccination, for instance. That's not the issue yet. No.
Oh, yeah. What's the debate like in Lithuania? Is still the pandemic an issue of discussion both among policymakers but also citizens?
Well, I think it's more or less the same as in Netherlands. Not as much debates and talks are right now. Of course, some numbers are raising up, and we are talking about the 4th vaccination routine, but it's not so much. I think people got used to it probably, and but some experts, some doctors are raising this question and telling that we cannot relax right now, but all the situation has relaxed. But what we see the positive outcome of this after this all the pandemic and the refugees, that the government has involved a lot of working with the civil society organization, the organized one, the experts. They are talking about the measures, how we should cope. We're talking about the lessons learned, how can we use it in the future, and we have to change even some laws on the extreme situations to NGOs to be involved more in the process from the beginning. So I think that's very important outcome when we're talking about the pandemics and all the crisis situations.
Indeed. And perhaps that's also an opportunity to discuss a little bit the state of civil society at large, but also the European movement in your countries, because I think civil society across the board felt the effect of the pandemic. Our strength lies into bringing people together, bringing communities together, bringing different stakeholders together, and that wasn't very possible during the pandemic years. But also, it kind of came at the end of a very sharp stink, where we have seen the sinking of civic space across Europe, funding drying up. Generally, the opportunity for civil society to engage with policymakers became much more limited as a result of the pandemic, but also other developments. How are you coping? How is your European movement, the European movement in your country coping, but also society, civil society at large, both in the context of the pandemic, but generally this process of shrinking civic space? Gaja, if you want to build on what you were saying.
Yeah, I can follow up, and then just not to forget, maybe we can talk about what Mark mentioned about propaganda, disinformation. I think it's very important as well when we talk about the civil society and the timing we're right now. But talking about European Movement Lithuania, so we are a very new organization, and unfortunately, we have created ourselves just in the hot spot of the COVID, and that stopped all our activities. So we are just trying right now to grow a little bit, to build our partners, to involve new members. So we are really a small organization, but we have very strong members in our board, which are raising the question of the EU, which are raising the question on the national level and especially on the regional level, which, as I emphasize, is very important to talk a lot, because people don't get so much information. They don't know what is going on. They don't see not so much value of being EU. So we have to convince them, we have to talk. And what is positive issue that there is not other organization in Lithuania which are talking about the same thing. So I think we have a bright future, but we need a lot of homework still to do. So we are working when trying to be more and more involved, but of course we are dependent on the projects, and it's very hard in timing because there are very big cuts, and especially if we are talking about if the crisis is coming anymore, so the civil society organizations will be the ones where the cuts will be made, unfortunately.
Mark, is the situation similar in the Netherlands and the European movement there?
Yeah, we were already before the pandemic rethinking our strategy, you might say. European Movement Netherlands has become a real network organization. We are sometimes in the middle of it, sometimes we are participating in it, but our main aim is bringing people together. That was quite difficult, of course, during the pandemic, but we took this role with new energy right now, and I already mentioned possible futures of Europe, exploring new futures of Europe with NGOs, governments, bringing all kind of people together. Is work in progress right now for us, and we do it with a new elan, and I think that this is our role in the Netherlands, and we build on the network we have, the long history European movement in the Netherlands has. Everyone knows the European movement, so that makes it easy for us. But we play this kind of role. We are not a direct lobbying organization, but we are bringing people together in order to go further with Europe. That's our idea.
Indeed. And I think that's something that it is very much unique for our organization, both those European movements that have been recently constituted, or others that have been there for a while. We're a constant feature of the debate around the future of Europe, and usually at the avant-garde, pushing forward for closer, more intimate cooperation among member states. And of course, the idea of expanding the EU is very much at the core of our advocacy. We want to bring in as many European nations as possible and create that united continent that can defend our citizens and promote our values. Perhaps one last question before I'll let you continue with your day. And I'll start with you, Gaja. When you're looking at the year ahead, 2022 is coming slowly to an end. 2023 will be upon us, not before long. What are your ambitions? What are your hopes and aspirations for the next year? And what would you like to see happen as we are starting a new 12 months?
Well, that's a very good question. And I have 3 issues I have to mention. So first one, we need to have on the high of the agenda the Ukrainian war and the situation in Ukraine, how we cope with it, what do we do, what exact measures we take as united EU, as one, as an orchestra, as I told. Then the second issue, I think we need to look more and work more with the organized civil society about disinformation and media literacy and resilience questions. And the third issue, I think we need to strengthen the civil society, the organized civil society, and invest in there, because they are the key for the future of Europe. So that's my main 3 issues.
Indeed, very good. Mark, what do you think? What's your hopes for next year?
Yeah, well, our idea is to connect with governments who are looking for new ways to build on the future Europe. They are sometimes the prisoner of their own ideas, and we want to connect them with NGOs, free-thinking people who have ideas but don't know exactly how to implement. They don't know the way to the institutions, and those 2 groups we want to connect and bring together, and trying to get the new ideas of this way of cooperation. So we have this program for this year and next year, and we are working on that.
Fantastic. Well, there's always a lot to do, and there's never enough people to do it, but it's really encouraging to see that both in the Netherlands and in Lithuania, the European movement is still there, working hard despite all the challenges. And from our side here in Brussels, we're always keen to engage and both hear you out, but also cooperate with you. So my hope for next year is that we will have the opportunity to also see each other more often and do more things together, not least because we're fast approaching towards the next European elections. That will be a big challenge for all of us and Europe itself. So with that note, we'd like to thank you again for taking the time. It was a real pleasure to talk with both of you. I'd like to thank also all our colleagues across Europe for tuning in and listening in. We will be doing more of this conversation, so we look forward to seeing you and hopefully also seeing you in person. Until then, have a good Friday and a very good weekend. Thanks a lot.